I want to show you this picture again of Turtle Island and remind you of this. This was done by Dancing Day to Night by Barry Lee, who is I think he's not sure exactly what tribe he's from. I met him at a powwow. He did the original painting, and then of course how they do those canvases, which they did on the board. So
can you hold it up a little more?
Yeah.
Heads are in the way. Thank
I will walk it. I thought I might walk it. Should you use the mic maybe? No.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think so. Okay. So anyway, here's the Turtle Island, and then you can see all the people dancing around it. Okay. And so those are different tribes, different peoples. And I thought it was wonderful because this is North America. Native people. This is especially in the Northeast. This is North America. And so I just found it charming, and I thought the painting is really kind of big. Yeah. So that was so that's what I brought that in. Show Laurie. Who am I showing? Laurie? Where are you? No, I know, but I'm looking for this. That's great.
There.
Don't you see yourself? Don't you see yourself?
The camera.
Yes, she is.
Are you seeing this?
The camera is up under the other one.
Yeah, there you go.
And there's this weird band on my computer, but thanks for including me.
Yeah, I mean, I know you're there, and sorry if you
That's okay. Don't worry about it.
You go, well, I feel bad. The other book that I'm going to be sharing with you today, I brought several books in. One was, well, let me share this one first. I got this a long time ago because I pick up books, it's like it's going to be, well, my kids have to get, when I'm done, my kids have to do, they're going to find all these books, and it is what it is, right? Hopefully they're kind of interesting to somebody. But this is Indian Paths in of Pennsylvania. And it's got all these maps. It's got the name of the trail, and it's got all the directions so you can find them on the road, which is so cool. So if you want to go, for instance, like around here, let's see if I marked one, because I know where mine goes. Oh, and it also has portages, because the first paths of anything were rivers, right? So a lot of times you'll find, and rivers sometimes have changed because we've had dams and we've changed the course of some of these things. That's Raystown Path. That's out in the western part of the state. There's one that goes right up by my house, up in Logue's Corner. It goes right through Logue's Corner. The old roads, it's really fun. If you look at stuff, the old roads follow the old Indian paths. Like 401 was a wagon road. That was an Indian path. It's in here. There's all these different roads. So when you're driving around, my father always used to say Pennsylvania is surveyed by drunken Indians, and he wasn't too far from wrong. So anyway, but that's a cool book if you want to take a look at it sometime. The other book I brought in. Who is the author again? Paul A.W. Wallace. Paul A.W. Wallace. And yeah, it's pretty cool. And you can, but what I like is it's got, it's like here's one. Catawissa Path, from Catawissa to Sunbury, if you know where that is in Columbia County. Because that's where my cottage is. The Catawissa Path was named for an Indian town of Catawissa, Lampigin's town, formerly Asukari, situated at the mouth of Catawissa Creek and beside a ford across the Susquehanna River. From Catawissa, the path went over hills and stuff. It just gives you these directions and tells you what roads to follow, which is pretty cool. The other book that I brought in is a beautiful book of pictures. It's after Columbus, the Smithsonian. They have beautiful things, and the photos of paintings and things in here are kind of amazing. Pictures of paintings that were done kind of at the time, so they're kind of a little bit more authentic than, say, from our imagination, of people who actually knew some of these people. But you can get, I'm visual, so if I can get a face or I can get a place, I'm really happy about that. So I always like to do that kind of thing. So anyway, this is a great book. It's got great pictures in it of warriors and battles. It's got maps and all kinds of stuff. Oh, hi there.
Who was the author?
Well, it's the Smithsonian. So it's Herman J. Viola. Viola. And then this one is probably one of my favorites. And I have a painting of his. It's a print, but it's I spent some money getting it framed because I love it. This is, I don't know if you're familiar with this painter at all. He's a Pennsylvania painter, and he's from around Gettysburg. If you ever are able to catch a show, go to it because it's really fabulous. This is Robert Griffin, and he has gone through a lot of research and like sort of, finding out, not just historically, not just making it up. He's done a lot of research about different things in Pennsylvania, and he paints so magnificently. Here's a painting he did called The Way They Lived, which again is that visual image of what it might have been like to be Indian henna, to see what she was doing. Here she is making a basket. That was really a typical thing to do for women. They wove mats, they made baskets. I would have fit right in because I like handcrafts. But they really, it's really kind of cool to imagine her with, a child by her side or a young daughter. Maybe now she didn't have children, but there this woman is, and it goes on about. And then there's a lot of, here's another picture of what it may have looked like with her beading. So there she is with a basket of beading. And then he'll have actual artifacts that show what he was painting from. So it's not like it's, just totally out of the question or craziness. So there's that. And a lot of the men too, and a lot of the battles. This is a story about Mary Jemison, and I'm going to digress for a minute from my talk today. I spent a lot of time reading about Mary Jemison. Do you know who she is? By any chance, have you ever heard of her?
Heard the name.
Of course not. Oh, have you? Really?
Jamison. Is it Jamison?
Jemison. It's J-E-M. She was a white girl, and she and her family lived between sort of Gettysburg and Chambersburgish area. Lynn actually knows where it is because she's from out in that direction. And there is a church, I believe, or an area that is dedicated to her. Her family came. They were Irish immigrants. These are the people we talked about when my first one, where this wave of Scots Irish people came. The Quakers were here, and the Swedes had been here, and they were interested in trading. And then the Quakers came, and they were all cool with the Lenape because they were really more laid back. They were farmers, and they weren't really interested in, they had land, but they weren't interested in throwing natives off of it. So yeah, you can live here. It's okay with us. And then the Scots Irish come in, and the Scots Irish are all like, oh, well, you're gone. It's like you had a house and, at the shore, and you left for the winter, and you come back and somebody's living in it. Basically that's what happened. And so these people had, taken this area of land, she and her family, and were farming it. And they had a big barn. In the story, well, there's a whole story on this, and I'll explain that in a minute. But anyway, Mary was taken with her family at about the age 16. Her younger brothers and her mother and father. Father was killed immediately. Her mother, she didn't know if she was alive or dead because when the natives came in, these were Iroquois that were pretty violent folks. Mohawk and Iroquois were pretty violent at that time. And when they came in, and she saw her mother's scalp hanging on a branch, so she knew that her mother was probably dead. But she had the little brother, and she got separated from the older brother, or the second brother, And so she was marched out by these guys for 3 days from that area. You can imagine how they must have been moving, because you know, if you've driven out in that area, you know how far it is from there to Pittsburgh. And basically that's Fort Duquesne. And she was within 3 or 4 days, they were moving. They got to Fort Duquesne on foot. So, you know, and no Pennsylvania Turnpike either. So, you know, you figure that was pretty, you know, it was a pretty good clip. And she was removed, the family farm was burned. And so she was given to, when she got to Fort Duquesne, which was Pittsburgh, you know, on that, you know, that little, on the point, she was offered to a Seneca, 2 sisters that were Seneca. They were much more complacent. They weren't as like violent like the because their brother had been killed by whites. And this was a very common practice back in the day. If you lost a loved one to another tribe or the whites or whatever it was, they would offer a replacement for that person. And so she was offered as a replacement to these 2 sisters. Now, these 2 sisters were wonderful. They were wonderful people, taught her their language. They moved they weren't from Fort Duquesne. They had just come down there, and they went up the Allegheny River and up into right at the border between Pennsylvania and New York. And that's where she lived. And this is all documented because Mary never lost her English. She learned the Seneca and she married into that family, but she never lost her English. So when she got to be an old woman, and she had, I mean, the book's like this thick. She got to be an old woman, she found a guy who would, she wanted to tell her story. She was called Mary of Two Voices because she could speak both. And she wound up talking to this guy and telling him her whole life story about what had happened. And it's really quite an interesting tale and a wonderful tale. Horrible, frightening, and lovely. Okay, so if you're really interested in it, now I'm going to refer back to Mary. But he painted her, and I thought that was so great. There's some other pictures that he did. That's, you know, we know what that looks like. That's Pennsylvania, right? So he was a great author. And part of that also goes in with this book, which is called The Peaceable Kingdom, which is really kind of a joke. I got this because this is about the Paxton Boys. And remember last week she talked about the Paxton Boys? She referred to that. Okay, well, the Paxton, Paxton Presbyterian is a very, very, very old church. A lot of really old churches here. Paxton Press, Donegal Press, which is not just our, presbytery. It's actually a church, right? And also like Fags Manor. I mean, I think there's 71 churches that I Googled. So there's a lot. This book is all about the Paxton the Paxton Boys and Reverend John Elder. Reverend John Elder was quite a guy. And he used to preach with a rifle beside his pulpit. He was a real right-winger. These people, because of that area, and Mary Jemison's story about people being taken, these people were really angry. The white people were very, very angry about this. I mean, obviously, wouldn't you be too? Your relatives, neighbors, friends were being pulled by the Indians, removed and killed, and so on and so forth, and they were seeing this. So what they did was they formed this group of people. These were not boys. These were men. A lot of them. They were kind of renegades. John Elder had a lot to do with it, about getting them roused up and so on and so forth. And they went up to Conestoga Town, which was a small town on this side, east side of the Susquehanna River. And they went to take all the people that were there, the Indians that were there. Now, there weren't a lot left, to be quite honest with you. Those folks, and she told you about this a little bit, those folks found this out that this was going to happen. So they took themselves to Lancaster, to the jail, and asked the jailer to lock them up inside for safety. Okay? That jail is at the bottom of the Lancaster Opera House. And you can go there, and there's a big plaque on the wall. I've seen it. that's pretty cool. You go in there and you go, oh my gosh, this really happened, you know? Well, they bribed the jailer. He let them out and they were massacred right there in Lancaster, right across the street. And it was like, I don't know, 15 or 20. And I mean, it was pretty brutal. So that's our Presbyterian heritage, because these guys were
The
Presbyterian.
author of that, Patsy, is
This is Kevin Kenny, and it's the Paxton Boys and Destruction of Williams Penn's Holy Experiment. Because remember Penn, like, let's have everybody come, let's have all nationalities, let's have everybody. It was all about that. Well, I digressed, but I thought that was good. So I'm going to get into today. What I'm going to get into is we talked about the doctrine of discovery. I had a local Indian Hannah story for you. So we know that this just wasn't out west somewhere, right? This actually happened here. Yeah.
Can you use the microphone?
Sure. I will. I hate it, but I will. But I know some of us how did everybody feel about the service today? Wasn't it better? Could you hear better?
yes.
I could hear better. Is this on?
They were here till, when I left here the other night, till 8 to 9 o'clock,
I bet.
working on that
Is
system.
this on now?
I'm gonna turn it on.
Oh, do you have to do it up?
Yeah, let me turn it on.
I don't know how it works. Okay.
Yeah, it's up on the.
You have to do it out there. Okay, well, maybe it'll come on. Let me step out then. So we talked about the basis of the doctrine of discovery, right? We talked about Indian Hannah to give you a local story that this just wasn't out west or far away from us. This happened right here. And we were complicit in it because that's what our heritage is. And then it also, today I thought I'm going to wrap this all up talking about what our Christian eye. Good? Okay. So now today I'm going to, how's that? Is that better? Good. So now I'm going to talk about our Christian eye looking at this. How do we look at this? Can you change history? Obviously not. It happened. It was the way it was. However, we don't want to whitewash it. We don't want to forget it. We want to learn from it. And we want to think about it and realize that it doesn't have to be that way going forward. And that's kind of, I think, as Christians, what our hope is. That's our hope, is that in Christ, we can look at these things in a different way. And I think our church, our national church, has done so. And I'm going to give you some stuff on that to take home. It's too much to read. Okay, so I am praying that my videos work for you. So if it does, I'm excited. Okay. This is from Lakota Woman, which was a movie that was produced in 1994. And I watched the whole movie, which was great. You don't have to, but it's about this young girl who's on the right-hand side, the actress. She portrays Mary Crow Dog, who was an actual person, and it has to do with Wounded Knee. So let's see if it'll. Sorry, you're going to get the credits first.
Long ago, to end the Indian Wars, the United States made a treaty with Red Cloud and Sitting Bull, the leaders of the Sioux Indian nations. The paper gave this great Sioux nation to our grandfathers alone. Our land began in Canada and stretched south into the Badlands of what would become the Dakotas. At its heart were the Black Hills, sacred to our tribes. We were promised this land was ours as long as the grass grows and the waters flow. The treaty was signed by President Ulysses S. Grant. Then General Custer announced there was gold in our Black Hills. He led his 7th Cavalry to protect the miners and the white settlers who swarmed in, and the railroad men the saloon keepers, and the lawyers who followed. They ripped the heart out of our black hills. They slaughtered our buffalo and drove our people off the rich prairie into the Badlands. It began for us a time of great darkness. All the dreams of our people seemed to die here, at Wounded Knee, where Custer's men shot down 300 Lakota men, women, and children and threw their bodies into a mass grave. This is where I came to find my soul, which I had lost and which had wandered by itself for many years. This land will be yours, the white men said, as long as the grass grows and the waters flow. As long as the grass grows and the waters flow. I am Mary Brave Woman of the Lakota Sioux. This is my story. Compared to many of my people's heroes, Crazy Horse, Red Cloud, it is only a little one, but it is mine. I didn't know it because we had love and respect. I loved most my Aunt Elsie.
Oh, this is where I get messed up. Okay, so we're going to try and click out of this. Go to the next slide, she said. I did. Okay, so in Journey class, I want you to see that because she's doing something that we're going to be talking about. Sorry, she's going to be doing something that we're going to be talking about quite a bit. There's the 10th, we did Doctrine of Discovery. The 17th was presentation by Catherine. Today, discussion of lament, apology, and reparation, and that's what we're going to talk about. This is lament. What she just expressed was lament. Now, the Doctrine of Discovery, for those of you who weren't here, was when European Christians were justified in going into foreign lands to invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all the Saracens and pagans whatsoever, and that every possession and land would be theirs and given to King Alfonso. They would be in perpetual slavery, and they did this. This is documented. Marie Columbus sometimes, an interesting story. There's the story about Indian Hannah, her story as an example about the disenfranchisement of a native population, which was our Lenape who lived here. Now, today, we're going to talk about what do we do with this information? What has the PCUSA Church done? Well, the first thing is lament. The second one is apology. And the third one is reparation. What does lament mean? Lament is to express deep regret, grief, or sorrow. And I don't know, I wasn't taught this. I didn't understand what lament was. You lose your parents, it's terrible. You grieve that, right? When you lose a spouse, if you've ever lost a spouse or someone that's that close, it takes a long time of lament. And that was my suffering, okay? I was on a canoe trip. I put myself in a position of being on a canoe trip and I thought I could handle it. I was fine in the boat, but boy, I had forgotten that I was 10 years older when I'd done this before. And I didn't have as much balance. And I spent a lot of time portaging with these women I was with and carrying a 70-pound pack and winding up falling because of the rocks and so on and so forth, and wound up falling on my backpack. And the young woman who was with me saw this as being like, here she goes again, kind of thing, an old lady, can't handle it, shouldn't have come, kind of like that, and not very forgiving. And I finally turned to her because the last portage, getting into the boat, I swear to God, I fell right in front of it. And I was so exhausted and sick of the whole thing. And she did something like that to me again, blew me off. And I just turned around and I looked at her and I said, you don't understand. You don't understand that I have a hole in my heart, my chest, I cannot fill. That was my lament, because that whole trip was my lament to my husband. And that's what came out of me. That's lament. So you're expressing deep regret or sorrow. Now let's look at it biblically. Lazarus death was a horrible thing for Jesus because he loved Lazarus. This is his dear friend, and he loved that family. And in John 11:33, this is a quote, when Jesus saw her weeping, the Jews who came with her were also weeping. He was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. Where have you laid him? They said to him. Lord, come and see. And Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, see how he loved him? Do you see the lament in that? He wept. He was so sorrowful that he lost Lazarus. Of course, we know what he did, right? Lazarus was raised. But, I don't have that capability. So to me, this lament was really something. Oh, here, let's see if this will play. Yes.
So someday somebody will hear me. My name is Andrew Windy Boy. I'm a Chippewa Cree. I did 2 boarding schools, one in Wapton Indian School in Wapton, North Dakota. There's Flandreau Indian School in Flandreau, South Dakota. Mid-60s to early 70s took me to the boarding school where I wasn't allowed to talk my native tongue or practice my native ways. It took me away from all of that and used me for talking that. It was my first language. I didn't know any other language. So whenever I talk, it came out. Cree would come out, and whenever I talk, I get hit. I got hit so much I lost my tongue. I lost my native tongue. The only thing I remember was my Indian name, which is Xenukihu, means old man eagle. That's the only Cree I knew.
So you can see that was a horrible thing to have suffered. So that's a little bit about lament. And the Indian boarding schools they took everything from those children. Do you know anything about Indian boarding schools at all? Okay, good to hear that. We have one right down the road in Pennsylvania here called Carlisle. And it's at the Army barracks in Carlisle. It's hard to get on now because, the government, but that was an old Civil War barracks for the North. And so they just, after the war was over, they made it into and the Indian War started, they transported Indians by rail, children, right to that place. And if you've ever been there, the train stops there's a stop right there where the school is, where the barracks is. And there's a creek that runs down in front of it. And as soon as those kids crossed the bridge across that creek, they were then stripped of their clothing. Their hair was cut, which is sacred. So that was an affront. Everything they had was taken from them, and they were given like uniforms. I'm sure they were scrubbed down for lice and everything else. So it was just a terrible cultural thing. And then they were there. Now, the only good thing I can think of really that came out of it was Jim Thorpe, because he was, one of our finest athletes ever. But he did, and there's a Thorpe Hall there. The gym is named after him also. There are 118 graves there of Indian children. How many of you would send your children to school to not come home, to die? These kids were literally taken from their homes. There has been some repatriation of this, and I've seen a couple ceremonies where they've identified who the child was. The family has come and disinterred them from that space, taken them home with great ceremony, and placed them in a grave in a family plot, which is really a wonderful thing. Really a horrible story of what we perpetrated. Psalm 130 says, and I think Andrew Windy Boy's whole story is about that lament, that terrible grief, that loss that he felt. And how do we do that? Well, Psalm 130 says, out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord. Isn't that what he's saying? Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears be attentive to the voice of my supplications. See if it's coming. Oh boy, here we go. We lament in prayer when our hearts are broken. And Mark 14:35 says, in going a little further, he threw himself on the ground and prayed that if it were possible, this is Jesus now, the hour might pass from him. He said, Abba, Father, for you all things are possible. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I want, but what you want. So this is Jesus lamenting this whole thing and asking God to please take this from him. Now, that is not what happened, and he reconciled that. So the Bible instructs us to lament over our sins and our sharing our grief and also our sins. This is associated with repentance. Repentance is agreeing with God about how bad our sin is and purposefully turning away from it. In 2 Corinthians, Paul says, for godly grief produces a repentance that leads to salvation and brings no regret, but worldly grief brings death. For see what earnestness this godly grief has produced in you, what eagerness to clear yourself, what indignation, what alarm, what longing, what zeal, and what punishment. At every point you have proved yourself guiltless in this manner. Well, that's, so we go from grief, we go from sin that happened, and also lament is a form of praise. In the Psalms, Israel asks God to answer according to his unfailing love, because he is a God of justice and righteousness, and because he has been faithful in the past. Let me go back. Lament is an appeal to God based on a confidence in his character. We trust God. She talked about that today, right? We trust God. That's the whole thing. We trust that God, that Jesus is the truth, and we trust in God. So in trusting in God, we lament things that have happened, but we have to go forward. Lament is also proof of relationship. Israel brought their lament to God in the Psalms on the basis of his covenant with them. It is in itself proof of their relationship with him. For the Christian, our lament when taken to our Father in heaven is proof of our connection with him in our relationship. Lament is a pathway to intimacy with God. By laying every emotion and every experience before Yahweh, the psalmist was reinforcing a bond of intimacy with Israel, breaking open their hearts to God. Jesus invites his disciples to participate in the arrival of the kingdom. And as N.T. Wright says, and he's a prominent theologian, when we are indwelt with the Holy Spirit, then somehow God is praying within us for the pain around us. And so God is with us in our pain. God is there. He's present, even though you don't feel that. You have that grief and or that trauma. Andrew Windy Boy is demonstrating the trauma that happened to him, and we have other forms of trauma. But God is with us in that, even though we don't know it at the time. Lament is a prayer for God to act. Many laments in the Bible are a call to action. They are a form of prayer and plead with God to pay attention. Petition, spell that right, is an essential element of a lament song, as in, please hear my prayer, O Lord, O God. Go back, yeah, okay. Lament is the participation in pain of others. Lament is not only for suffering, but for the solidarity with the suffering, because when one of us suffers, we all suffer. Jesus says in Psalm 22, prays in Psalm 22, a plea for deliverance from suffering and hostility. His death was the ultimate prayer of solidarity with others in pain. All right, let me go back. Yeah, okay. Now, that's all about lament. And I think since we're older here a little bit, I will admit it, we have all been through some kind of pain that we can't, it's like Ann said the other day about putting the toothpaste back in the tube. You can't do that, right? You have some pain, you've had some struggles, you've had some suffering, you've had some problems. And so we can all understand this, and God walks with us through that. my daughter did all the graphics on here, so it's really funny because it was about regret, but she got the R at the end. So we're going to talk a little bit about lament. Now, there's a whole book, the whole book of the Bible is Lamentations, right? And so Lamentations is all about lamenting. And also the Psalms has a lot of lament in it. So apology is the next step of this. We talk about regret, responsibility, and reconciliation and repentance. And please go. Okay. So remorse and regret. The starting place for biblical apology is remorse and regret. We need to express this when we have hurt others. The injured party needs how we are remorseful. If I can find it here. One of the examples of that is Psalm 51. My favorite psalm, absolutely. I had this somebody said, were you a teacher? Yeah, I was. I'm public school, so, you can't say anything, right? Because that's not okay. I mean, I don't think that's okay. Sorry, I don't think that's okay for me to go and give my proselytize and give my point of view. I've actually, Tredyffrin Easttown, what was it? Middle school? Yeah, middle school, I think, when I taught there. There was a class in Bible literature, and that was really good because they weren't talking about faith. They were talking about this beautiful literature that came from the Bible, and I thought that was a great thing. But as a public school teacher, I could never divulge my own opinion on this. However, in the back of my classroom, when I taught in detention for 13 years, and I watched these adjudicated kids come in from Chester County, I was the teacher. Okay, there were nobody else. It was me. And we were above Delaware County in Lima. They hadn't built Picasso yet, so we were down in Lima. And in the back of my classroom, I had Psalm 51 framed, and I talked to kids a lot, in the counseling piece of what my teaching was. And I, how'd you get in here? What'd you do? Blah, blah, blah. And, they would talk about what had happened to them. And I would hear some of these stories of lament, remorse, and regret from these kids. And, I would say to them, the back of there's something you ought to read in the back of the room. And that's all I would do, and point them there. I don't know how legal that was either, but I felt strongly about it. So Psalm 51, if you probably have all heard it, it's a Psalm of David when the prophet Nathan came to him after he'd gone into Bathsheba. And of all the people, I mean, David, whose name means beloved, really messed up, right? I mean, what an example to us as somebody who's favored in God's sight on all different levels, really makes a mess out of things. And he did. And he says, this is a prayer for cleansing and pardon. So it's a Psalm of David when the prophet Nathan came to him after he'd gone into Bathsheba. Have mercy on me, O God. See if you can pick out all the lament and everything else. According to your steadfast love, according to your abundant mercy, blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. For I know my transgressions, and my sin is ever before me. Against you, you alone, I have sinned and done what is evil in your sight, so that you are justified in your sentence and blameless when you pass judgment. Indeed, I was born guilty, a sinner, when my mother conceived me. You desire truth in the inward being. Therefore, teach me wisdom in my secret heart. Purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. Wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow. Let me hear joy and gladness. Let the bones that you have crushed rejoice. Hide your face from my sins and blot out all of my iniquities. And this is the part I always wanted them to really read. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and put a new and right spirit within me. Do not cast me away from your presence, and do not take your Holy Spirit from me. Restore me to the joy of your salvation and sustain me a willing spirit. Then I will teach transgressors your ways, and sinners will return to you. Deliver me from bloodshed, O God of my salvation, and my tongue will sing aloud of your deliverance. Okay. Appropriate, wasn't it? Okay. I worked out. I didn't do that, but, oh Lord, open my lips and my mouth will declare your praise, for you have no delight in sacrifice. If I were to give you a burnt offering, you would not be pleased. The sacrifice acceptable to God is a broken spirit. Oh God, you will not despise. Do not do good to Zion in your pleasure. Rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, and then you will delight in right sacrifices, burnt offerings and whole burnt offerings. Then bulls will be offered on your altar. And there's a lot of symbolism in there too, obviously, which we're not going to go into. But you can see what he's doing. He's asking for cleansing. He's admitting his guilt, right? He's lamenting what he did. And so it's about taking responsibility for what he did. A second component of biblical apology is the encapsulated saying in the three most difficult words, I was wrong. How many of us can say that? You kind of skirt that sometimes. You kind of try to explain it, don't you? I think a lot of times we try and justify what we've done. We kind of try and make it so, well, it really wasn't that bad, so, I didn't really mean that, that kind of thing. So just saying I was wrong. The admittance takes us from remorse to responsibility for what has occurred. I'm sorry for what I did, and I did it. Whoops. Well, the other piece, let's see if this will play, is reconciliation. The third step in biblical apology is learning to say, will you forgive me? He does that in this psalm, doesn't he? He asks for forgiveness. So he does all of this in that particular Psalm 51. This says, I want our relationship to be restored. Isn't that what he's saying in the last part of that? Creating me a clean heart. And then, I want to be there with you. I want to go there. I want this relationship with you, God. I don't want to be set apart. I want to be in your presence. Repentance is the fourth step of biblical apology. This is the action. It not only recognizes that we did wrong, it expresses a desire to do right. Now, we're going to talk a little bit from there about what are reparations. My daughter put the flag up there. I'm sorry about that. I didn't want that picture, but she put it up there. So, reparations are policies, procedures, and practices that aim to compensate individuals, communities, or ethnicities for exploitation, abuse, or genocide. So you've done the lament, you've got the apology, and now what do we need to do for reparations? We know that what we did with Native populations, Indigenous people in this country was a terrible thing, right? We admit it, we accept it, and we go, okay, so what can we do to help it get better? Well, in Matthew 5:23, and that's supposed to say, what does Jesus say about this? I couldn't get this to come up so well. Matthew 5:23 to 26. So when you are offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are on the way to court with him. Your accuser may hand you over to the judge and the judge to the guard, and you will be thrown in prison. Truly, I say to you, you will never get out until you pay the last penny. So you got to make it right, is what he basically is being said here. You got to make this right. Come to terms with it. If you're offering your stuff at the altar, I'm so good, I'm offering this stuff, but you have something about your brother and sister that's not right, the offering doesn't fly. The offering is hollow. So you got to go straighten it out first. The debt, and this comes to where the debt of Christians to Indigenous people and people of color, because we also include in this, there wasn't just what we did to Indigenous people. We also enslaved, imported a lot of people here that, was a horrible situation too. And, we did that for economic purposes. It was a terrible tragedy, one that we are still suffering from today. We have people who have suffered these traumatic events, and they've done a lot of studies on this where generational trauma is a real thing. it's not just that person that was suffering, it's their children and then their grandchildren and their other children, you know, it goes on. It's generational suffering. And we're in the process of this. Right now, we're in the 7th generation of Indigenous people. I don't know if you know that or not, but we're in the 7th generation since a lot of this, since the clearances and everything had happened. There's been 7 generations. That's supposed to be a big time. It's a big time of change. And we've witnessed some of that and through legislation and other things in this country, and also our church. And I'm going to give you some examples of that. For 400 years, the Euro-American community and the Christian denominations, including the PCUSA, we owe a great debt to Indigenous nations and people of color. These wrongs need to be paid so future generations will have, or I guess it's meant, or future generations will have to pay for that. Well, here's some examples of reparations and from our church, and I'm going to give you a few of those. One of the things they've done in our church, which is amazing, and you can, this is right off the website. Betsy didn't invent this. This is all right off the website of different instances, and I'm only going to give you a few. There was a church called Memorial Presbyterian in Juneau, Alaska, and in 1940, Reverend Walker Soboloff led a thriving Alaska Native community, primarily preaching in both Tlingit and English. In 1962, citing a new policy to end segregated churches, the PCUSA closed it and loaned the money from that church, because they closed it and they took the money from it, to a non-Native congregation to build a new church. We thought we were doing a good thing because we were not going to be segregated anymore. However, this was a thriving church that we just decided to do. So they found this out, and in October 20th, 2023, Reverend Bronson Boswell, a PCUSA minister, addressed Hindi Northern Light United Church, which stands a few blocks away from where Memorial Presbyterian Church once stood, apologizing for the racist closure and for an act of spiritual abuse. The church has been renamed, and I'm not going to say this right, Cuniax Hidi Northern Light Church, which means People's House of Healing in the Tlingit language. Isn't that cool? The PCUSA has committed to funding scholarship programs incorporating Tlingit heritage into church services and adding Native art and architecture to the building. That's one of the things that we've done. We funded funding for educational and cultural practices. The national, regional, and local Presbyterian church leaders have committed to paying nearly $1 million in reparations over a period of years to See Alaska Heritage Institute to support language revitalization efforts. They made their first payment of $110,000 in 2023. Further payments will fund cultural opportunities for Alaskan youth, support Tlingit and Haida reentry programs for incarcerated returnees, and materials about the closure of the Northern Light Church. I can't say this name, LeGuen Na Liz Medicine Crow, president of the first Alaskan Institute, said that she was excited about bringing in younger people and children and youth in the language and culture, because we took away a lot of language. And as you could see how traumatic it was for this man that we saw on video, it was a pretty serious thing for him. Because when you take your language, and if you've ever been, does anybody here grow up with a different language as a child? Anybody? Yeah.
No, when Wayne's father moved here from Denmark, they really tried to speak English And Wayne and his brother had perfect opportunity to be fine, but it wasn't cool
Right.
in the 50s to
Right.
speak anything in addition to
That's
English,
right.
so he never really learned.
You were actually almost punished.
Right,
The
right.
parents didn't want that. I had a lot of kids that would come through the different times I've been teaching and different, who came from, were Hispanic or were whatever, and they were not encouraged. In fact, the grandparents spoke no English. These kids were told they were not allowed to speak Spanish or speak a different language, and they were punished for it at home. And of course, when they went to school, they spoke it all the time, and a lot of kids lost that. Sometimes they were able to keep it because they could hear some of the older people speaking, and they a lot of times became the interpreters for the older generation. They go to the doctor with them, they do whatever because the parents or grandparents couldn't speak. Happens with Asian people frequently. What a cultural diversion that poses in here, diverse situation that is. Can you imagine African Americans coming here as slaves, not speaking any English, and coming in here and then having to suffer all the trauma that they did and losing their culture, not just their land, everything. They lost everything and coming here and being plunked in a place where they didn't know. The food wasn't the same. I mean, that was part of the Indian boarding schools. The food wasn't the same. The landscape wasn't. This is tremendous loss. And so we're trying to do some of these reparations to help make this better for the next generation, to go forward, because I think that's what Christ wants us to do. That's what God wants us to do.
My
yeah.
grandparents came from Ukraine,
Right.
and they really couldn't speak very little English. But what they did was they moved in, all those people that came from Ellis Island, and kind of moved into a community
Right.
where they could talk to
Right.
one another other than just point.
Right. That's absolutely true. Look at Chicago. I mean, Chicago has what's the population there? They have a huge population. What is it? It's not Czech, but they have Polish. Thank you. They have a huge population of that. Up in Minnesota, Norwegians. All these people, they would go collectively. My Aunt Antonia has written all about that community that was all, in the Midwest. These people, when they would go, would take a lot of that with them, try and preserve it. The other thing with, children, this event offers a framework for other entities and institutions, this whole idea of giving back to this church that had once been thriving, and institutions, the native people of this place. So that's one. Returning to church property that was once indigenous, that's what they did there. But there's also been other places. I read of a camp, and I think I alluded to it in the last presentation. There was a camp that a church owned that was built on the tribal lands. The people in that congregation decided to give that back to the tribe that it belonged to, for their use, which was really cool. And there have been a lot of situations like that. I think I remember, and I can't off the top of my head, and I didn't have time to find it. There was a church in the Midwest that was given an endowment by a white man in the 1800s. And it was to be used as scholarship for white children. And they, when the congregation found out that it was not inclusive, they really had a lot of turmoil as to what to do with this. Could they continue to receive this money, or should they do something else with it? Because it really is, not right. And how do we right that wrong? And I can't give you a specific thing, but it was on. I saw a video on it. These people struggled with this for a couple of years, because then you have to think about the giver and what the intent of the giver was, and was it because it was a different time. See, that's the issue here. We also giving back of native lands to indigenous owners, and supporting land and water rights whenever possible. And of course, we know that's a lot of what happened up in with the one tribe. Supporting legislation that impacts indigenous people. And of course, we've had Deb Haaland, who's a Native American, who's been our Secretary of Interior, and she's a Native person. And of course, a lot of legislation has gone with that thought process in mind. Bears Ears was, taken back, not allowed to be developed. Part of the problem now with the development of Alaska, Alaska sits on some mineral and oil and gas. And I just heard on the way in, the Russians and the Chinese are all about sort of invading the Arctic, and they're going to drill. And this is going to change the ecosystem there. The whole pipeline, that pipeline from Prudhoe down all the way down to the coast has changed that whole ecosystem also. But we felt some impacts of it, but we've been very careful with it. And, as the polar ice recedes and so on, and the planet changes, what's in our need for energy increases, what's going to happen? I don't know. If I did, I'd be sitting someplace else besides this church. Now, I have a cause, and I know I've talked to you about this before. It's missing, murdered, and Indigenous women, and this is very near and dear to my heart. I feel very strongly about this whole scenario. If you're Yellowstone watchers, I guess that's one of the things I can say. I don't know who watches Yellowstone, but if you remember the one, Casey's wife, who is an Indigenous native, was pretty almost abducted. She got stopped on the road. Her car wouldn't go, and she got stopped on the road. Some guy in a pickup truck says, "Oh, and you got to understand, out west, you're talking about hundreds of miles between places." And she got stuck on the road, and this white guy in a pickup truck comes by and says, "Hey, I'll give you a lift to the next town." Well, that wasn't really his intention. And when she realized this and he had locked the doors, she was able somehow to get that door unlocked, and she ran. And fortunately, she ran, and he ran right after her. But there was somebody had seen some of this. One of her people on the reservation had seen some of this native guy, and he came and he shot the guy because these women are abducted frequently. No law enforcement bothers about it. They probably, their husband probably, maybe they went away, maybe they weren't. And so there's a lot, the percentage of them is higher than it would be for women, say white women in our area. This is some artwork that has been shown. What the red hand is the symbol. I wear this a lot. This was made by a woman. I think she's Mohawk. She's an artist, and this is blown glass. She blows glass. Mm-hmm. So this was the red hand, and I took these. Did I tell you this before? I have to think about it. Anyway, I bought a bunch from her, and I took them. I took the money that I paid for them. And then I made a little bit of profit, and the profit that I made, I sent to this organization in Lame Deer. This gives you some information. You can look at these posters. I had a poster thing set up in my booth at Crickets. I paid, I think, $25. I charged $35, and I sent them money because they need funding. I mean, they need funding. And there's these are statistics. They're not current, but they're pretty accurate, but it says more than 6,000 Indigenous women have been reported missing across the U.S. Within the first 72 hours, a missing person investigations are the most critical. And then they talk about the fact that when a loved one goes missing and what you should do and who you should contact and how you start putting this in motion, because law enforcement is very lax in this and doesn't care, and so that's become a whole thing.
What does it mean? The red hand.
It's a symbol.
Okay.
It's a symbol. This woman is an artist also, and the red dress is also a symbol. And because these are, if you notice on here, these are ribbon skirts. Are you familiar with that at all? But out west, the women wear these skirts in a lot of ceremony. This woman, they hang a lot of the red dresses or the red skirts, and it shows they'll often have a face of a person who has missing, who's never been found. And so this was an art display of hers, and it's still no more stolen sisters is another slogan that they use. This is a video, and I hope it shows the whole thing. because I was having trouble. It's supposed to extend, it does. There was also a young man, another Yellowstone thing, and I'm like, I watch it, but I'm not like, whatever. There was a character in the story, and I'm not sure if you know, Mo Brings Plenty. If you're familiar with Mo, he's a very handsome man with long braids, and he's part of.
I'm trying to get it
I
off,
know.
sorry, I'm panicking.
You're fine. So he's the native person that is with the tribal leader who they're trying to develop a casino, and he's the guy that's with him. He has long braids. He's a real guy. His name really is Mo Brings Plenty. And I somehow got associated on Facebook. No, I've never met the guy, with Joe Brings Plenty, who is his cousin. And Joe has an interesting story. He has been a tribal policeman in North Dakota, and on the reservation, he also saw these kids that had so fragmented families. Alcohol or drugs is so prevalent in these communities because they're low income, they don't have a lot of hope. Half of them don't have running water. I mean, it's poverty times 10. And he saw a lot of these kids that were really suffering and they had nothing to do. He developed a boxing school on the reservation and would bring these kids in and would teach them how to box. And they go to these various tournaments all over the place out west. And because of his involvement, he also got elected to the tribal council, which is a really big deal. Like, those people in that council have a lot of political power in the tribe, and he got involved in that. His son Cole, who looks just like Mo Brings Plenty, and was in 1883 as an actor. Cole was found about a year ago. And I'm going to play you a video of this. I hope you can see the whole thing. Today I'm braiding my hair for Cole.
Remember me, when the sun comes up in the morning sky, there I will be, soaring with the eagle so high, feeling free. Remember me, down the road, hand in hand, you and me. Hey-oh, hey-oh, hey-oh.
So that's the story of Cole, and it's pretty horrible. His father went out. They did videos on this. They found his body, found his car first. He got involved in an altercation at a dancing club and with some whites, and they found his car first, a couple days after the event, and then they found his body about 3 days later, about a mile and a half away from the car. His hair had been cut. And his father's just, I mean, you'd be beside yourself, but the fact that your child's life ended violently is even worse. They never have found the perpetrators. Nobody's talking. Law enforcement is not pursuing it. It's a real terrible thing. Comes from a good family. Yes.
Why can't law enforcement be forced, feel obligated to take care of these things, to at least investigate these things? I mean, how can you say they just turn their backs on it?
Do you know anything about
And
politics?
the white, blue-eyed blonde,
They find it.
white, yeah.
You know politics, right?
Oh,
Well, they don't want to do that. They don't want to stir the pot. A lot of times, if you watch the movie I just showed you at the beginning, you'll see what happened at Wounded Knee. Those people were thugs. They were employed by a guy who was trying to get power in the tribe, and they were white guys who were trying. And that's what happened at Wounded Knee, and that was in the 70s. Nothing's changed. And this,
Dick Cavett did a whole thing on that, book.
well, yeah. Well, I've been to Wounded Knee, okay, which was quite an experience. David took me. Can we go to Wounded Knee? Sure. So we went there, and standing on top of that mound up there, The church was there. Now this was, Liza was a baby, so it was 78, 79 that I was there. It happened in 74 in that rebellion. And I was there. I'm just standing there and I'm like, David, I'm going, there's 350 people buried in here. And I knew the story because I'd read Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. So I knew the story about how that occurred. You know, the army just took Gatling guns and just blew everybody away. And then just, you know, indiscriminately threw all the bones in this big mound. And it's there. I mean, they have a monument to it and yada, yada, but that was exactly, it's still the same. Nothing's changed. I mean, now here you have a kid in 2023 or 24 that's murdered and nobody's looking for him. Same thing. You don't think any of those army guys Wounded Knee back in the 18 whatevers were held accountable? No. So it's the same kind of thing. Let's see if I can advance this one more time. This is another video about honoring and mourning 215 children found buried at a residential school. And I want to talk one more thing about what our church has done. Look, he's dancing in a jingle skirt. It's a child. Usually it's women, but this is a child. Okay, now I want to talk a little bit about our church because, okay, all this has happened. What did our church do? Well, our church wrote an apology, and I'm going to just read a little bit of it. It was published in 2016. We apologize for the pain and suffering that our church's involvement in the Indian boarding school system has caused. We are aware of some of the damage that this cruel and ill-conceived system of assimilation has perpetrated on the United States citizens of Native American ancestry. For this, we are truly and most humbly sorry. Do you hear the apology? You hear the lament and the apology that's written in there? And then they talk about, I'm going to give you this, so I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's getting to be time. But in our zeal to tell you of the good news of Jesus Christ, our hearts and minds were closed to the value of your spirituality. We did not understand the full extent of the gospel of Christ. We should have affirmed the commonality between your spirituality and our understanding that God's sovereignty extends with the length from east to west, with breadth from north to south, with depth throughout the earth, and with height and throughout the sky and heavens. And then it talks about the doctrine of discovery. We know that apology is only the first step in the larger hope of repentance and reconciliation. We seek the guidance of relationships with your people within and beyond our church as we seek to identify and act on restorative practice of policies of the relational, communal, and national level. And here's the last part of it, which I think is really good. We seek God's forgiveness, healing grace, and guidance as we take steps toward building mutually respectful, compassionate, and loving relationships with Native American peoples. We also seek your forgiveness and hope that you will walk together with us in the Spirit of Christ and partner with us as equals as we participate in God's redemption of the world so that our peoples may be blessed and God's creation healed. Finally, we pray that you will hear the sincerity of these words and that you will witness the living out of our apology and our actions in the future. I think that's really beautiful. And I'm so proud of our church for doing this. And I hope that when you read, this happens at General Assembly, which is every 2 years, right? When you hear about these committees or you get on that website, you can see that our church is one of healing in action and really thinking about Christ practically in the world, what we're doing, where our witnesses, and how we do these things about lament and apology and reconciliation and redemption. And I think it's really important. I have this to give to you so you can read it on your own. I won't read the whole thing. And then I also have, this was, and this is long. This is, and this all comes off of the PCUS pages. So it's not, you can find it. It's kind of covered in there. It's under mission if you look through it. But this is the rationale. For thousands of years, more than 500 tribes of our Native American brothers and sisters lived on the land that is now the United States of America, not as owners, but as cohabitants, respecting and caring for the land as sacred trust, the natives. The spiritual perspective of cohabitation was only a part of the full sacred vision received by their elders of creation and of the mystery that surrounds us all. The sacred vision is rich and deep and is a treasure for them and could be for us. And this is the rationale from our church that's written about this. And I think it's really cool. So I also did that one for you too, so you can take that home and look at it. It's too much to read. But anyway, I hope that you understand where I'm coming from and maybe look at some of these things with a different eye. And maybe in talking to other people, it makes you aware of, when we talk about prejudice or we talk about, about really kind of justifying things that aren't right, we can really look at it with a different eye. Interestingly enough, I went last night to I'm so tired. I went last night to a ballet master class for my daughter's dance teacher, who she had in Wilmington 20 years ago. And on the way home, as we're coming back from that, I said, with her students, because ballet is significant in the dance world, right? I said to her, Liza, I said, your dancers could really benefit from this dance class. And she said, yeah. She said, yeah, they did. I said, ballet is the basis of all dance. And she looked at me. She's just done this program with me. She looks at me, and I'm thinking, what's wrong with me? She goes, Mom, it's not the basis for all dance. Look at African dance. This is a cultural problem that you have. You're right. Funny, so I went, yeah, after all I've done, and boom, there it was. Okay, so for ballet students, I guess it's true, but it's not anymore in the dance world. It's not that's not the best thing. There's other forms of dance that are more readily accepted culturally, and I'm like, where was I? Okay, so anyway, thank you for coming and listening. I appreciate it. Thank you. Please look at any of the books that I have out. You're welcome to look through anything and take a handout. Thanks. Anybody have any questions or anything?
I wanted to make one comment.
Sure.
The college I went to, Williams College in northwestern Massachusetts, about 20 minutes south of Bennington, Vermont. Williams made a decision a number of years ago to make sure that every entering class has a certain number of Indigenous students. A lot of these students, of course, don't have the usual board scores or the grades, but the idea was to try to help raise them up and also help to make leaders who can go back to, some of them are still on reservations, and make a positive difference. So I would just throw out to everybody in the room, if you're an alumni of a college, you might talk to them in terms of the admissions office and other places about taking in Indigenous students.
Yes, ma'am.
Another factor that we have to accept is that land grant colleges in many cases were based on selling off the lands that were appropriated by the United States government. And those lands are still in the hands of land grant colleges. And yes, that has been very controversial. And I went to a land grant college, and that has become, over the last decade, I'd say, has become a significant topic of conversation with the board of trustees, with student protest, with, I'm not sure about acceptance policies in all institutions of higher education are in flux. And we have no idea what's going to happen in the immediate future.
That's right. Very good. Anybody else? Yes.
Our daughters both went to a camp called Dwight Mission. It had been a mission school in Oklahoma for years, and then became a camp for Presbyterian kids. And just about 2 years ago, it was taken back by the Cherokees. There was some funding involved, but now it is wholly owned by the Cherokee Nation.
She mentioned that to me. She mentioned that to me. She told, because I thought this was a great idea in March, when I spoke with her at length about, and she told me about that. Yeah. So those are the kinds of things that we've done as Presbyterians about also giving back land is a big one, because we realized that we appropriated it, we didn't really have a right to it. It doesn't, yeah.
There was a television show on, I don't know, maybe a year or so ago, it had Hillary Swank in it.
Yes.
And it was
yes,
about Alaska
yes,
and the indigenous women
yes.
being killed. And I knew nothing about it. I watched it because I thought, oh, Hillary Swank, it's got to be
Right.
great. But it was an amazing show. And I thought, I didn't realize women were just disappearing out of Alaska. And they talked about, the law enforcement not doing much. And the crux of the thing had to do with a newspaper going out on a limb to try to expose what was not going on.
It's very corrupt. There's a lot of corruption involved. There's a lot of official people involved usually that sweep it under the carpet. And there's tremendous sexual abuse in a lot of this. This is sex trafficking stuff. There's a lot of sexual abuse. The same thing happened in boarding schools. Besides the physical and the mental, there's tremendous sexual abuse going on. It's just a horrible story. It really is. And that's why we need to lament and say, oh my God, how could this have happened? How could we have lived through this? Because some of it, we've lived through some of this. How could we allow this to happen? And then going forward, I'm so sorry, with the regret and repentance and so on. And then what do we do about it? What are the reparations? How do we handle it? Do we go and talk to law enforcement? As she did, she pushed that, or do we talk to the people in the county or the state that are involved in that, so that we can try and correct some of that kind of those policies? And what do we do about it? And that's what, as Christians, that's what we're called to do, to take some kind of action because of our faith, because this is not okay with Jesus. It's not okay. So what do we do? Yes, sir.
So Jesus told his disciples, I'm sending you out as sheep into wolves. So this is a world
That's right.
dominated by wolves.
That's right.
And even today, a friend of mine who sang in choir today has told me his neighbor, who is black, decided to take up bicycling as a way to stay fit. He had to stop because of the amount of stuff that was thrown at him while he was riding his bike.
Absolutely.
Today.
Yeah.
Here.
So, yeah, I would suspect that the sheriff's department on that reservation probably knew somebody involved.
They all do. They all know each other. They're all
And,
connected.
and so you assume people are wolves.
Right.
And
That's
you have to be smart and be forgiving and loving.
They have rangers on there, and they're all carrying guns on
they're
there.
all corrupt.
Yeah, they're all on
They're
there.
all hooked
They're
together.
probably selling the drugs, but they're all on
And
there.
that's been since the beginning of all of this, believe me. Yes, ma'am.
I think what I've learned, which is a lot, is that, this is just one of many issues. You think about the Holocaust, you now think about the Indians, think about what's happening with our elderly population in these senior care homes where they're not being taken care of. That's one of my personal things right now, and I'm dealing with the Department of Human Services about. However, we just don't really realize how many big issues there are, and it just keeps happening again and again. But what I'm grateful that I've done, and Betsy has reinforced that in me, is that I'm not giving up. And we all have to keep fighting, and not all of us have that same thing that we're fighting for, but together we can make a difference in the world by fighting for these individual issues and the people that are being forgotten. And there's so much of that. It's just heartbreaking, but I feel grateful to be part of a community that cares so much. And I'm new to this church, so I just want to say thank you all for being here and for being that reinforcement, and that light is helping me find my way. So thank you.
Thank you.
And tomorrow night, if anyone wants to come to our dementia
I saw
committee,
that. Yeah.
it's Tuesday, right?
Okay, yeah, I saw that was on the
So-
bulletin, yeah.
It's at 6 o'clock, and we kind of break into groups and we talk different things.
Right.
Like if someone has someone living at home, someone that, you know, is in a facility and they're not happy with it, and they get a
Right.
chance to talk and express themselves.
Yes, hold on a second. Go ahead.
I was surprised that you're talking about Turtle Island because I'm from the West Coast. And Turtle Island there is an actual island that they lived on. So I don't know what you're referring to here. If you're talking
North
about
America.
that or
North America.
Okay.
If you look at any, like I've seen a lot of this, it's a lot of it has to do, you know, Native Americans were storytellers. Amazing storytellers. I actually had done, I was going to do a story thing with you guys, and I just don't have the time. But yeah, there's a whole story about Turtle Island and about how this was, that's where the people came. That was the people's land. And, you know, again, as I said in the first thing, the people lived here, they hunted here, they fished here, they worshiped here, they lived on the land, but they didn't own it. This was the creator's land. And Turtle Island is his creation. So there's a whole story about that on the back of the turtle, which I think is really beautiful. And
Well, actually, Betsy, that's what I was gonna say. I thought, just focus it, what makes me sad is how we don't respect other people's cultures.
Right.
And the opening of this sheet that you handed out, they live not as owners, but as cohabitants.
Right.
Respecting and caring for the land as a sacred trust.
Right.
You know, and we came in, we, the Western Europeans, came in and said, we want to own it.
Right.
And what is wrong with you that all you want to do is share? What's wrong with you that you don't want to own it? And they thought that they were whatever, you know, savages.
That's right.
Or whatever. And
That's
it's just, it boggles my mind, you know, with the perspective of, you know, 150 years later.
Right, well, that's the
Learning
whole,
about it.
that's the whole thought process, and that's why I wanted to really emphasize that. Okay, thanks for saying that. Yeah, because it was a clash of cultures. I mean, I have a book, I think at home now, it says, it's called Clash of Cultures, which is what this was. It was you know, the idea of the explorers, you know, taking that flag. You've all seen those pictures of explorers when they, from Spain and Portugal, and they're going out with a flag, you know, of the king so-and-so, and it's got a cross on it, you know, and they're going out, they're going to plant the flag, and this is our land. Okay, you know, and it's very interesting as to, you know, that's not really good. That's not a good thing. Yes.
When my phone went off loudly, I was just looking up Red Hand to get more background on it. And the first thing that comes up is Gaza, one of the Academy Awards to represent the problems of Gaza. The next thing that came up was Ulster. So there is so much wrong going on in the world, you know.
Right.
I never even got to
They do a lot with the red hand across the face. You'll see women, you'll see whole, like when they have like a rally someplace or powwow, big powwow down in Washington or wherever, you see the red hand across people's faces. And that's to, you know, again, about this missing Indigenous women, that's their symbol. So thank you for coming. Yeah.
Just one short plug for the Gathering of Women and Men.
Yeah.
Third District, Pennsylvania, which is an organization I'm involved with, trying to chip away at the unbiased way in which our legislature is constructed in Pennsylvania. And the legislative resolutions, which have been very carefully designed to keep the power in a very small number of hands. So if anyone's interested in a presentation on discussing what we may be able to do. You know, it's a relatively small movement. We were working on resolutions. Now we're working on gerrymandering again. We'll be back to resolutions, but we did make small changes.
Good.
I mean, the changes in the last legislature, the House districts are not quite as gerrymandered because the person who, 11th hour, like not till 3 o'clock in the afternoon on swearing in day, became the Speaker of the House, wasn't bowled under, and he's one of the people who've been working on sexual abuse in the Catholic Church. And he said, no, the people do care about this.
Yeah.
So he had hearings around the state, and it really slowed down the process, but it changed a little the balance on committees. Very wonky, but if you change the balance on committees, which is the bottom level in each of the houses, so if that changes, make a small change. But it is something that citizens can work on.
That's right. And citizens with a conscience. as Christians, citizens of the conscience, with a conscience. Thank you.
Thank you.